Hello there, and welcome to Origins of Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science slows down just enough for your thoughts to breathe.
Tonight's story drifts far from ticking clocks and starlit skies, and instead settles into the greenest place on the planet.
A world that hums quietly beneath clouds and holds more secrets than we've dared to imagine. A place so vast and so alive that even satellites can't quite agree on where it ends. It's a world that seems eternal, untouched, older than history itself. But what if the Amazon isn't just a wilderness? What if hidden beneath those endless trees lie traces of something the beginnings of civilization itself?
Before we wander too deep into that thought, take a small moment to notice where you are right now.
Maybe you're lying in bed, with the day fading behind you. Maybe you can hear the quiet hum of a room, the faint rhythm of your own breathing. I'm curious, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it in your corner of the world? Somewhere as we speak, night is falling across the Amazon too, and the forest is waking up. If you find this slow unraveling of mystery soothing, if it helps you settle your thoughts, I'd be grateful if you'd give this little corner of calm a like or subscribe so we can keep wondering these questions together. Now, let's follow the sound of rain on leaves and see what it's been hiding all this time.
The Amazon has always seemed like a place beyond civilization, at least in the way we usually define it.
For centuries, explorers described it as a green emptiness, a wilderness too dense, too well.
To the outside world, it was a realm of isolated tribes and untouched nature.
But that picture, as it turns out, may have been painted on very thin paper. Beneath the thick canopy, the rivers and the root systems twisting like veins, evidence is starting to surface of something far more complex. Clues that suggest the Amazon may once have been home to organized populous societies thousands of years before Europeans arrived.
For a long time, these ideas were dismissed as wishful thinking.
Early explorers had spoken of vast cities and sophisticated cultures, but their accounts were labeled. The dominant view became one of scarcity.
Any sign of structure was assumed to be temporary, accidental, or recent.
But new discoveries are slow dismantling that assumption. The jungle, it seems, has been quietly keeping secrets.
Modern LiDAR mapping, a technology that uses lasers to see through vegetation, has started revealing patterns beneath the canopy that are anything but natural. Archaeologists studying these images have found remnants of road networks connecting settlements across hundreds of kilometers.
The shapes suggest planning, engineering, and collaboration.
They don't belong to random villages hidden in isolation. Point to a civilization, or perhaps many, that learned how to live not in opposition to the forest, but in balance with it. Imagine that for a moment. A society that didn't clear the forest to build cities, but wove the forest into its design.
When they disappeared,
The jungle didn't destroy their legacy. It absorbed it.
To the human eye, everything vanished. To the ecosystem, everything remained.
Still, the Amazon doesn't give up its history easily. The heat, humidity, and constant decay make it nearly impossible for traditional artifacts to survive. Wood, cloth, even bone vanish quickly.
What remains is subtle. Soil enriched beyond natural fertility. Fragments of pottery baked into ancient gardens. Clusters of plants growing where they shouldn't, suggesting they were planted, not born there.
Every clue feels like part of a much larger picture that has yet to be revealed.
Some researchers believe these ancient Amazonians were among the earliest landscape engineers on Earth. They may have transformed the forest itself into a living, self-sustaining city.
When you think about it, that idea reshapes what we mean by civilization. We usually imagine progress as cities of stone and iron. But what if the first great cities weren't made of rock at all? What if they were green?
What if they breathed, grew, and healed themselves?
Beneath the rivers, archaeologists have found traces of canal systems and fish ponds.
In certain regions, there are vast patches of dark soil known as Terra Preta, literally black earth,
which contain charcoal, pottery fragments, and nutrients not native to the region. These soils are still fertile today, thousands of years after they were created.
It's as if the people who made them understood the chemistry of life so intimately that they could design a living technology.
Yet in the Amazon, ancient people managed to create soils that renew themselves.
It suggests not primitive experimentation, but mastery. Knowledge developed slowly, passed down through generations.
The forest didn't resist them. It collaborated.
And if that's true, then the history of civilization needs rewriting.
The Amazon may not have been the world's untouched wilderness.
It might have been one of humanity's oldest laboratories for coexistence, a cradle of innovation buried beneath vines and silence. This story challenges a comfortable myth, the idea that civilization only flourished in temperate regions with open land and predictable seasons. It suggests that humans were capable of developing complex, sustainable societies even in the most challenging environments.
But the direction is clear. The Amazon we see today might not just be a natural wonder. It could be a palimpsest, a living record written over by nature but never fully erased. The forest itself seems aware of this, in its own quiet way.
Its diversity, its cycles of renewal, its structure, they all bear signs of long-term influence.
Others appear to have been domesticated and then rewilded.
Even the distribution of trees across vast areas follows patterns that mirror human cultivation more than random evolution. It's as though the memory of human hands still lingers in the soil, guiding what grows and where. When explorers in the 16th century first encountered the Amazon, they reported vast cities and well-organized societies along the river banks. Later expeditions failed to find them, and the accounts were dismissed as hallucinations or exaggerations born of tropical fever.
Finest silks right here.
How much for the pottery?
Careful now, don't drop that.
Within a few generations, the forest can swallow anything. Roads, plazas, even monuments dissolve into moss and roots.
By the time later explorers arrived, nature had completed its work of camouflage.
The people were gone, the jungle had healed, and the world forgot what had once been there. The Amazon held on to its secrets, waiting for the right tools and questions to rediscover them. And now, with satellites mapping in wavelengths our eyes can't see, and algorithms detecting geometric order in chaos,
Those secrets are surfacing slowly, cautiously, like ruins emerging through mist.
But these discoveries aren't just about ancient engineering. They're about perspective.
they ask us to reconsider what we mean by civilization, intelligence, and progress.
The societies that flourished here may not have built monuments that lasted, but they built something else.
They understood the pulse of the ecosystem and learned to move with it instead of against it.
That kind of wisdom doesn't fit neatly into our usual timelines of human advancement.
Perhaps that's why these early civilizations disappeared so completely into the green, because they were never separate from it to begin with.
It's hard to imagine the ground beneath your feet once carried roads and houses.
That blurring might be the most important revelation of all. It's about what kind of relationship with the Earth allowed them to thrive in one of the planet's most demanding environments.
It's a relationship that feels less like exploitation and more like conversation.
The forest gave, humans shaped, and in return, the forest endured. The knowledge of how to live with balance, how to nurture the land that nurtures you, still exists in the traditions of indigenous peoples today. Their practices of agriculture, hunting, and stewardship echo those of their ancestors, connecting an unbroken.
So perhaps the question isn't whether the Amazon hides the secrets of Earth's first civilizations, whether it's been whispering those secrets all along, waiting for us to listen properly.
Because what if civilization isn't measured by what we build, but by what we sustain? And as we begin to uncover more evidence, the geoglyphs, the black soils, the forgotten networks, the
progress might look less like expansion and more like harmony. Somewhere under a carpet of leaves and centuries of rain, there are still pieces of pottery. In that sense, the Amazon isn't just a place. It's a memory that never stopped growing.
And as night falls again across its vast expanse, the forest hums with unseen life.
And they lead us deeper toward a world where nature and civilization were never opposites, just different expressions of the same living earth.
The Amazon has often been called the lungs of the planet, though that phrase is both poetic and only partly accurate.
They're beautiful. After all this time.
But as billions of small exchanges happening at once.
Every tree, leaf, and root participates in a quiet rhythm that links the forest to the sky. When sunlight hits the canopy, water drawn from the soil rises through stems and leaves and evaporates, joining the clouds.
The same droplets that began deep underground return as rain a few hours or days later.
That endless recycling of moisture creates its own weather, sustaining the forest almost entirely on its own breath. In a sense, the Amazon waters itself. This system is so vast that it influences weather far beyond its borders.
The air currents carrying that moisture drift west over the Andes and sometimes as far south as Argentina.
They affect rainfall patterns on continents, feeding rivers thousands of miles away.
The air currents carrying that moisture drift west over the Andes and sometimes as far south as Argentina.
They affect rainfall patterns on continents, feeding rivers thousands of miles away.
In that way, the forest acts not only as a biological engine, but as part of Earth's climate machinery.
To imagine the scale of that is to realize that the Amazon isn't simply part of nature. It is one of its main architects.
Each tree contributes to this process, yet none of them are aware of it.
Together, they create a system that regulates temperature, moisture, and even atmospheric chemistry.
And somewhere within that vast machinery, humans once lived, built, and left traces that still influence it today.
If we could remove the vegetation without harming it, just for a moment, what would we see beneath?
The outlines of rivers would twist like blue arteries, and between them, faint patterns would emerge. Geometric forms, straight lines, rectangular clearings. These aren't random scars of nature.
They are marks of design, evidence that people once understood this green engine and learned how to coexist with it.
It's almost impossible to imagine what life looked like in such an environment. Yet clues suggest it wasn't the struggle we once assumed.
The ancient inhabitants of this region didn't need to conquer the jungle. They used its rhythms as guidance.
Unlike temperate climates where planting and harvesting follow predictable patterns, the Amazon cycles depend on water.
Rivers swell and retreat, swallowing entire floodplains and revealing them again. The people who lived here developed ways to work with that rhythm rather than against it.
They planted crops that could survive both wet and dry periods. They built raised fields and mounds that stayed above the floods, protecting seeds and food stores. When water returned, it deposited nutrients, enriching the soil naturally.
This was agriculture designed to cooperate with the pulse of the river, not to resist it.
Today, the remnants of these raised fields can still be found, stretching across regions once dismissed as uninhabitable swamp. They form patterns visible from the air, grids of human planning, hiding under the thin layer of grass and brush.
It paints a picture of people who didn't just survive in the Amazon, but shaped it deliberately.
That balance is one of the most remarkable aspects of Amazonian life. Instead of exhausting the soil, as intensive farming does, these systems kept renewing it, ensuring that the next generation could continue the same way.
The fertility wasn't random. It had been engineered through controlled burning, composting, and the careful addition of organic waste and charcoal.
This created a structure that trapped nutrients and supported microbial life. It turned poor tropical soil into a living medium that grew richer with time. Modern scientists still can't fully replicate it. What's more, the pattern of these fertile patches align with ancient settlement sites, suggesting that people managed landscapes at scales larger than individual villages. They created networks of productivity that stretched for hundreds of kilometers.
There are no stone pyramids or city walls. The architecture was living, seasonal, adaptive.
Instead of resisting nature's variability, it absorbed it. The forest was not wilderness to be subdued. It was infrastructure. The forest itself became a mosaic of human intention and ecological cooperation.
That's why when we call the Amazon a natural wonder, we might also be describing one of the world's largest cultural landscapes. Understanding this changes how we view both nature and humanity. It shows that the separation between the two is much thinner than we think. In that sense, the Amazon's breath is not purely natural. It carries the legacy of ancient human design. The moisture rising from its leaves today might be passing over the same ground where people cultivated gardens centuries ago,
where families built homes from woven palm and clay, where fires once burned gently to make the black soil.
The roots run deep, holding the memories of those who came before, a history written in blood and soil.
When European colonizers first arrived, they misunderstood what they saw. To them, the abundance of fruit trees,
The openings, and the variety of plants looked like untouched wilderness.
They're perfectly straight, right along the ancient roads. How is this possible?
Some of the Amazon's most common food species, like Brazil nuts, acai palms, and cacao, grow.
These trees didn't just appear there. They were cultivated, traded, and propagated intentionally.
Over generations, they became part of the forest's fabric. Blending human history with natural evolution until the line disappeared. This pattern suggests that the forest we see today isn't entirely wild in the way we once believed.
See how the land remembers. We too must remember, for the knowledge we share today is the shade for the generations yet to come.
Each patch of unusually rich soil.
The forest breathes with traces of these decisions, long forgotten, but still alive in the arrangement of its life. Even more intriguing is how these ancient systems echo ideas in modern environmental science. Concepts that mirror what the Amazonians were practicing long before recorded history. To them, success wasn't measured in surplus or expansion, but in equilibrium.
The Amazon's atmosphere itself bears witness to this. The vast amount of water vapor released by trees. A single large tree can release hundreds of liters of water into the air daily. Multiply that by billions, and you get a feedback system capable of influencing rainfall across continents.
It's as if the forest participates in the planet's respiration. But here's the subtle part.
Some studies suggest that this balance remains remarkably stable in regions associated with ancient human modification.
It's possible that ancient design helps stabilize local ecosystems in ways we're only beginning to grasp. This makes the idea of civilization in the Amazon even more fascinating. It wasn't built on extraction or control. It was built on participation.
The people understood their environment well enough to enhance it, rather than deplete it.
We often think of civilization as something that transforms nature into something else.
Walking through the rainforest today, you can feel that intelligence all around you.
It's in the spacing of trees, the faint remains of causeways barely visible under leaves.
The way light filters through a canopy engineered by evolution, and perhaps by human hands too. The air feels heavy yet balanced, filled with moisture that's been cycled countless times.
Each breath you take there is borrowed from that system, from leaves that opened to the sun and exhaled life into the air. If the Amazon's balance depends partly on human influence, then our modern disruptions aren't just harming nature. They're breaking a conversation that's been going on for millennia. The burning of forests, the clearing of land, the draining of wetlands.
These acts don't just destroy trees. They silence an ancient dialogue between humanity and Earth.
Yet within that grim reality lies hope. The rediscovery of ancient Amazonian civilizations doesn't just reveal the past. Imagine designing cities that mimic the forest's feedback systems, where every structure participates in air, water, and carbon cycles. These aren't distant fantasies. They're lessons already proven by history, buried in the ground and waiting to be remembered.
It's strange to think that the key to our environmental future might lie in understanding societies that left almost no ruins.
But perhaps that's exactly why they succeeded. Their greatest monuments are invisible because they were never meant to stand apart from the world.
They were meant to disappear into it, to become soil and seed and air. Maybe that's why the forest still breathes so steadily, even after centuries of change.
Some scientists refer to the Amazon as a self-regulating biome, capable of maintaining its own stability through internal feedback loops.
Others suggest that this stability was at least in part co-created by ancient humans.
In both cases, the message is the same. The forest is not passive, it's dynamic, aware in its
It exhales moisture that become clouds, rain, and rivers. It cycles nutrients through countless layers of life. It stores carbon, moderates temperature, and shapes weather. But it also holds memory. And perhaps that's the real secret the forest has been keeping. Civilization doesn't end when buildings crumble or when people vanish.
Sometimes it continues as air and soil, as balance and breath. The Amazon's green ocean keeps moving, rising and falling, like the tide of a memory too vast to fade. And beneath that tide, more stories wait. Stories about people who once shaped the world without leaving scars. A structure discovered one season may be invisible the next, swallowed by vines and humidity. What is new becomes old, and what is old becomes part of something living.
The forest doesn't preserve monuments, it reclaims them. It turns memory into mulch.
And in that process, the past isn't lost so much as it's blended into the present. That's why studying the history of this place feels like trying to read a book written on leaves that never stop falling.
When archaeologists work in the Amazon, they often describe it as a race against nature's efficiency.
A structure discovered one season may be invisible the next, swallowed by vines and humidity.
The forest erases human boundaries faster than anywhere else on Earth. In temperate climates, ruins can last for millennia, protected by dry air or cold stone.
Yet, strangely, that same erasure might be the reason so much of the Amazon's ancient story survived in a different form.
Instead of brittle ruins, it left behind living patterns, soils, plant distributions, waterways that continued to function.
Even ceramics, which usually outlast civilizations, degrade quickly under this relentless chemistry.
That's one reason why for centuries, scholars assumed that the Amazon had no deep human past.
It seemed logical from an outside perspective, but the logic was flawed.
Of a world that recycles too efficiently to keep its artifacts in view.
Even the air participates, carrying spores and bacteria that start decomposition before things even touch the ground.
The entire ecosystem is designed for renewal. In that sense, the Amazon is less a place and more a
Human traces don't fight this process. They join it.
A carved stone buried under leaves becomes a nutrient source for moss. A clay shard enriches the soil that grows. Over centuries, layers of life and death merge until the boundary between artifact and earth disappears completely. And yet, despite all this erasure, the forest doesn't lie. It conceals, but it also records.
Phytoliths, tiny silica structures formed inside plants, show evidence of crops like manioc and maize grown thousands of years ago.
Traces of human habitation emerge as subtle chemical signatures rather than visible ruins.
The technology that made this revelation possible is LiDAR, which sends laser pulses through the canopy to map the ground beneath, where the human eye sees only unbroken forest. LiDAR reveals straight lines, circles, and geometric clearings. Roads appear where none were expected. Defensive walls, moats, and platforms trace the outlines of vanished communities. Some patterns stretch for kilometers, connecting what appear to be separate settlements into regional networks.
The forest had hidden not isolated tribes, but organized societies, urban in scale.
Though entirely different in appearance from our stone-built definitions of cities.
I still find this difficult to believe. Are the readings confirmed?
Confirmed across all bands. This changes everything.
Rivers meander, failing to form perfect squares. Erosion creates only organic shapes.
It's perfect. It has to be intelligent design.
The scale and frequency of these sites suggested populations in the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, living in coordination.
The discovery didn't just change what we know about the Amazon. It forced a reevaluation of how we define civilization itself.
The irony is that early explorers had already described something similar.
In the 1500s, a Spanish explorer named Francisco de Orellana traveled along the Amazon River and reported large settlements
and cultivated fields stretching for miles. Later expeditions failed to find them and dismissed Orellana's account as fantasy.
The assumption was that no society could survive, much less thrive, in a rainforest so poor in nutrients.
But what those explorers didn't realize was that the forest had already erased the evidence.
Within a few decades, entire landscapes could vanish from view, reclaimed by vines and rainfall.
When scientists rediscovered those patterns centuries later using modern technology, Orellana's stories suddenly looked less like exaggeration.
This cycle of discovery and doubt isn't unique to the Amazon, but it's especially pronounced here because of how
When we look at ruins in dry deserts or high mountains, we see permanence.
Amazon reminds us that permanence is an illusion. Time here behaves differently.
It's compressed and accelerated. Processes that take centuries elsewhere unfold in years.
One where survival depends on integration rather than resistance.
The people who lived here likely understood this rhythm intimately. They didn't build for eternity.
they built for continuity. Their cities weren't fixed points, but evolving parts of the ecosystem. That kind of design makes little sense to industrial logic, but in an environment like this, it's the only approach that endures.
In recent years, researchers have found large regions of what they call forest islands. Small, elevated areas surrounded by wetlands that contain dense vegetation different from the surrounding forest. Many of these islands contain pottery shards and evidence of ancient habitation.
What's fascinating is that these sites aren't random. They form networks connected by causeways and canals. When mapped, they outlined territories of coordinated human activity that persisted for centuries.
There, under layers of organic matter, lie traces of human presence, erased yet preserved by time.
That paradox of loss and endurance defines the Amazon's history. The forest consumes the physical, but retains the functional.
Everything tangible is gone, but the systems those people built continue to operate.
In a way, the Amazon is their monument. Not a monument of stone, but one of process.
Receive the ancient wisdom. Rise and command the forest.
This idea challenges more than just archaeology. It challenges our assumptions about legacy itself.
We're accustomed to thinking of permanence as success, as proof that something mattered.
But in the Amazon, permanence is replaced by participation.
They are not written histories, but living ones passed from voice to voice, preserved in memory rather than paper.
These stories tell of cities shining with white stone, of roads that stretched between the clouds and the rivers, of societies so vast that the forest itself was once tamed to rhythm and design.
To money outside listeners, these tales sounded like myth,
the kind of exaggeration that arises in isolation. The ruins whisper secrets of kings and gods.
When European explorers first reached the Amazon basin, they heard these accounts from indigenous people.
The legend spoke of great civilizations that had vanished long before the arrival of foreign sails.
When the great serpent awoke, the mountains themselves began to walk, and the rivers turned to fire.
To them, the jungle was a frontier, a land to be mapped and conquered, not the remnant of something once organized and intelligent. They couldn't imagine that beneath the vines and humidity lay the echoes of what might have been one of humanity's oldest centers of civilization.
But for the people who still lived there, those stories weren't myths. They were inherited truths.
They described ancestors who knew how to talk to the rivers, who planted forests instead of cutting them.
Some versions describe them as the builders of the dark earth, people who mixed ash and clay and bone to create the fertile soil that never dies. Others speak of the masters of fish, who made rivers into reservoirs and could summon harvests with the turning of the moon. These are not random details. They mirror in uncanny precision the archaeological discoveries of the last few decades.
Anthropologists who study oral tradition know that stories can preserve information across astonishing spans of time.
A myth about a flood may originate from an actual flood thousands of years ago. A story about a mountain of fire
In the Amazon, where written records are nearly impossible to maintain. Oral history becomes the archive. And within that archive, the legends often contain clues about real events, encoded in metaphor, reshaped by.
When researchers compare these narratives with satellite and LiDAR data, the overlap is striking.
And LiDAR has now revealed long, straight causeways running between settlement clusters, their outlines hidden.
Trails of gardens that never grew old correspond with areas of Terra, the dark, fertile soil still yielding crops today.
Even the legends of vast communal centers, sometimes described as places where people from distant regions gathered for trade and ceremony.
Match patterns of circular plazas found in recently mapped sites.
These aren't coincidences. They are fragments of a collective memory surviving in language long after the physical world forgot.
It's humbling to realize that for centuries, indigenous people were telling the truth about the history of their land.
And the world simply wasn't ready to hear it.
The bias of early archaeology leaned heavily toward visible monuments, stone ruins, metal artifacts, grand sculptures.
These were considered proof of sophistication. The Amazon offered none of these.
The forest's ability to erase, combined with the colonial desire to categorize, led to a long silence about its real history.
Yet, those who lived within the forest never forgot. They just didn't describe it in the language of conquest or archaeology.
Their legends often describe the relationship between people and nature as a kind of partnership.
One story from the Upper Madeira region tells of a woman who taught her people to plant the trees that feed the rivers.
Look out! The bank is collapsing! Get back! It's flooding!
Another story from the Xingu Basin speaks of the night gardeners, people who worked only after sunset so that the animals could eat freely during the day.
In some regions, elders still refer to themselves as caretakers of the old roads.
When asked where those roads lead, they often smile and say, they lead to the ones who came before.
The phrase takes on a literal weight. The old roads exist, buried under centuries of regrowth.
And they connect places that would have required planning, governance, and long-distance coordination.
The people who told these stories weren't imagining lost worlds. They were describing the landscape as they knew it before the forest reclaimed it.
Among the most persistent myths in Amazonian law is the story of the White Cities, or cities of shining clay.
Early explorers transformed these into tales of gold and grandeur, calling them El Dorado, the city of gold.
But the indigenous versions rarely mention wealth. They speak instead of light, places that glowed because their walls reflected. The descriptions seemed less fantastic. The shining wasn't from gold, but from the color of the earth itself.
The forest bends to our will. Everything here belongs to the city now.
Forgetting its dependence on the forest, it expanded its fields beyond the balance of soil renewal and began to collapse.
Such stories are ecological philosophies as much as they are myths.
Even after centuries of disruption, displacement, and loss, many indigenous groups maintain detailed understanding of plant cycles,
soil chemistry, and animal behavior that align with the kind of knowledge ancient societies would have needed to thrive here.
The legends are not just narratives. They are vessels for that knowledge.
A poetic way of preserving the technique of adding charcoal to maintain fertility.
Another legend warns that rivers become angry when blocked completely, which corresponds to the ancient practice of partial diversion.
Though the ink fades and the paper turns to ash, the voice of the past echoes still.
When modern researchers work with indigenous elders, they often find that oral maps,
stories describing journeys, landmarks, and seasonal movements align almost perfectly with archaeological models of ancient settlement distribution. In other words, the geography of myth matches the geography of evidence. And so the ancients built this scar upon the land, a monument mirroring the great sliver in the sky. Where tales describe rivers that once ran in straight lines, satellite images show remnants of ancient canals. This overlap suggests that even after thousands of years, the memory of human influence on the landscape endures. Easy to underestimate the precision of memory in oral cultures, but repetition and communal retelling act like data storage.
It is here, child. The crimson bloom of our ancestors. This map, unseen by mortal eyes, will guide you through the darkness. Look closely, for the symbol.
what might sound to an outsider like myth is in truth a coded survival manual. When you listen carefully, the legends of the Amazon are not about lost wonders, but about continuity.
They said the mountain was cursed, that anyone who dared to climb it would be lost forever. But Alara knew the truth hidden at the peak.
For people living in a landscape that constantly changes, the idea that their ancestors once lived in harmony with
In this worldview, the ruins aren't gone. They're simply asleep. When a new plant sprouts from a mound of dark soil, it's seen as the ancestors speaking through growth. Life and death, creation and decay, are one continuous dialogue.
But in the Amazon, those boundaries dissolve.
Within me lies the ghostly city, swallowed by the earth.
From the dust I rise, the keeper of the forgotten truth. The stones remember everything.
One of the most compelling examples of this continuity comes from the Upper Qing region, where researchers have worked alongside.
The residents had always known about them. They referred to the mounds as the sleeping houses, places where the old people rested.
When scientists excavated these mounds, they found pottery shards, food remains, and hearths, clear signs of long-term habitation.
The locals didn't need LiDAR to know the truth. They had preserved it through generations of oral history.
To them, the discovery wasn't news. It was confirmation.
Listening to these legends today requires humility. For centuries, the scientific approach treated indigenous.
Only when technology confirmed what stories had already said did the academic world begin to reconsider.
The forest speaks in patterns, and those who live within it learn to listen in ways that science is only beginning to quantify.
If you consider how much of early human history is still hidden under soil and water, it's likely that oral traditions everywhere.
In that sense, the Amazon's legends aren't unique. They're just the most vivid example of how memory can outlast matter.
You see now what time can do. But I remember when these mountains were young.
The forest may erase physical traces, but the stories it inspired remain among the most resilient structures humans have ever built. It's tempting to romanticize this, to see the Amazon's oral heritage as mystical or otherworldly.
But that would miss the point. These stories are pragmatic.
They encode centuries of empirical observation. When to plant, when to harvest, how to manage fire without destroying habitat.
The metaphors carry lessons as real as any written manual. To call them myths is to overlook their precision.
As researchers continue mapping and excavating, they often return to communities for context, asking which places are sacred, which names are remembered. In many cases, the answers.
The jungle holds the secret. In the time before time, the spirits whirled to existence.
The trees that now stand where cities once did are younger than the stories describing those cities.
The forest grew back over memory, but the memory never left.
And so the dragon was vanquished. Its fire turned to ash.
Now you, boy, tell the...
In the Amazon, they're finally meeting again after centuries apart.
And so, the forest continues to whisper, not through ruins or inscriptions, but through people.
Descendants of those who once built gardens and canals still carry their ancestors' science in the form of narrative.
The past here isn't dead. It's spoken,
And as archaeologists uncover more evidence of complex societies beneath the canopy, the old stories gain new clarity.
They are no longer dismissed as myths, but recognized as the memory of a civilization that lived in harmony.
And so the beast emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing like the embers of this very fire. The words will drift through the air, the same way they have for generations.
The old stories tell of a time when the stars themselves whispered secrets to those who would listen. And he listened. The trees above them, some centuries old, are still younger than the tale itself.
We are the memory keepers. We remember the journeys.
And when the great iron birds finally fell from the sky, the forest whispered their forgotten names.
When you look down at the Amazon from above, especially through the mist that clings to its canopy at dawn,
it seems impossible that anything could be hidden there. The forest appears endless, a solid green surface.
But beneath that illusion of uniformity lies one of the most complex landscapes on Earth. A terrain folded and reworked by countless generations of people who learned to live within it. Somewhere below the leaves, beneath the roots and vines, the remnants of cities rest in silence. No skyscrapers, no crumbling temples, no statues of forgotten kings.
These are cities made of earth and intention, woven into the landscape so completely that the forest grew right back through their streets.
Even when the first geometric clearings were found, shapes too symmetrical to be natural, they were brushed off as minor curiosities.
It took the quiet pulse of lasers scanning from above to make the truth visible again.
My God, look at the scale of it!
Perfectly straight roads connected large circular plazas. Grids of smaller earthworks surrounded larger central structures.